Talk to us about how hell, the denial of hell or the watering down of hell is the most widespread of heresies in the modern world.
I'd say it's widespread because it reaches even into the very devout Catholics who go to daily mass, who go to adoration. Come on, Father, the Lord's really not going to do that. He's a loving God. And I think they have two things on their mind. First of all, their vision of God is merciful, which is not wrong, but it needs to be, we'll return to how we balance it back. But they're also, I think, probably concerned about their children and grandchildren. Only 17% of Catholics are even going to mass. And I mean, gosh, the number of people who have largely just turned away from God, not always in a direct denial, but just indifference, irrelevance, is just legion in our culture. Only, like I said, 70% of Catholics, 17 go to, and that's bigger than Europe.
Yeah.
So I think somewhere there's a need to sort of, how do I navigate this? Because so many people I know and love aren't very serious. Do you think they're going to go to hell? And, that kind of a thing. So those questions certainly need to be answered as well. But I think we have to start with, I call it widespread, because this isn't just some dissenting theologians or, left-leaning Catholics or however you want to describe. This is I would say, an almost universal, if not a literal rejection, but a practical rejection. The hell is not really a present reality that we need to deal with. Come on, let it go. It's not going to affect most people. Maybe Hitler. We always need Hitler around.
Yeah.
He's got to go down there. But
Stalin's in there with
yeah. But, all those kind of really, really, really bad people, serial killers. But that's just not how Jesus talks about it. And, we can, again, all these things we can explore. I'll let you take the lead. But that's why I say it's widespread. It affects just about everybody.
Do you think that the churches are empty because we've lost the fear of hell, or have we lost the fear of hell because the churches are empty?
I think it's empty, the churches. I think it's the cause, one of the main causes, that most of the stuff we do and say and talk about as a church is largely irrelevant to people. Well, going to Mass is nice. I kind of get a little booze at Christmas and Easter, and it's kind of a cute thing to do, sing a few songs. But basically, is it really essential? No, not to most people. Who needs to really go to Mass, or who needs sacraments? Who needs to pray? Who needs the sacred liturgy? Who needs any of that stuff, really? Because we're basically all going to go to heaven either way, whether we do it or we don't. And, again, in terms of the moral life, too, come on. Lots of people live together outside of marriage. Come on, God's cool with this stuff. He's merciful, and maybe it's nicer not to do things like that. But at the end of the day, there's very little motivation. In other words, anywhere in the church, there's no urgency. There's very little urgency about missionary work. There's very little urgency about getting people back to Mass, except we might have to close the church, or there might be a money problem. What about souls?
Yeah.
The Catechism, even to this day, still teaches that it is a mortal sin to miss Mass on Sundays. And again, I suppose maybe not everybody knows that, and they could be spared of the full impact of that. But at the end of the day, I think, it's lessened any sense of, what's this all about? Who goes to the doctor if they don't know that anything is wrong, and they're constantly told there's nothing wrong, you're basically fine?
Would you say that missing Mass is a moral sin or a grave matter, and you have to have the knowledge and consent along with it?
Yeah, you have to have knowledge and consent.
Right. And I think that's where, personally, Monsignor, I might call you Father a few times by accident, but sorry, But, that's where I get hung up, because I see, you talk about invincible ignorance, and clearly there's there's people who have never heard the name of Jesus, and, but then there's also people in this country who have been raised in such filth, such squalor, or such extravagance that their conscience was never formed.
Correct.
And so they heard they're supposed to go to church on Sundays, but how do you handle that with? Okay, they might have heard the doctrine, it went through their ears and into their brain, so they have quote unquote knowledge, but they don't have full knowledge because they're not educated like you and me are on these subjects. And then consent, are they lacking consent because of the cultural pressures, and they just have fallen subject to the malaise of the conscience of these days? So how do you know when they have knowledge and consent?
Well, You don't. I mean, God ultimately has to make that final choice. I do think, though, that we need to avoid a very common sin today that's related to this problem, which is presumption.
Yes.
Oh, well, come on. Nobody knows anything like that. Come on. People don't know, And we're very dismissive. Let's take something like going to Mass. That could be something that's a kind of a knowledge of people who are used to rituals and they grew up with this. But basic moral principles, though, most people know. In fact, I've never had a couple preparing for marriage who were living together before who didn't know there was something wrong with that.
Yeah, okay.
I mean, there's a deep sense of, Thomas calls it synderesis or synderesis, depending how you want to pronounce it, a basic grasp of fundamental moral principles that are across the board in the human family that, again, there's an awful lot of that going on today, too, a lot of denial about, again, the questions of human life. They've got, you can play all around you want, but that's a child in the womb. People know, and they know deep down. That's why they're so angry with the church.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of, I think, so I want to just say that those are principles that you've enunciated that are very important in moral theology. A person, in order to incur mortal sin, even if something is objectively mortal or grave, that it's, it requires sufficient reflection or knowledge, and it also requires full consent of the will. And yes, that's our teaching. But I think we're too quick to rush and assume it's not there. It's one of the big problems we have with annulments in this country. Most tribunals in this country don't presume people have enough freedom to make a lifelong decision. I think that's a wrong presumption. Pope John Paul railed against it for many, many decades. Mm-hmm. But as I say, there's a constant presumption today that most people are, pardon the expression, too stupid to go to hell.
Hey, thanks guys for checking out the Conor Gallagher Show. Please take a moment to like, subscribe, or comment, or whatever you got to do to support it. And I appreciate that very much.